Morning, everybody. Good to be here in a practical on-farm place to talk about potato storage. Usually when I'm just about to give a talk, I'm sort of terribly nervous and worrying about what I'm going to be saying, but as Glyn was driving a coach and horses through the way I used to control black dot and silver scurf in potato stores there, I began to sort of think about other things, but there you go. We were certainly trying to keep our stores cold to reduce silver scurf in particular. I'm quite conscious that a number of people in the audience were actually at our Sprout Suppression Forum, and I'm trying to summarise some of the things that went on there. So I'm bound to get it wrong. And judging by what's happened so far, if I have any questions or whatever for other AHD members, they're probably just legging it out the back door now. But, hopefully, so we'll stay. Anyway. Thank you. Why did we hold a Sprout Suppression Forum? I just want to go over some sort of different areas here. So I'll cover the who and the why. We did it. Look across from the pond. We had some people from the States there to tell us about what was going on over there. We had industry, regulation, a bit on R&D, new products, and tried to look ahead as to where we were going next. So firstly, who was there? Well, as I say, a number of people here, but we tried to cover through an invitation process the whole of the industry really, but to get to a group where we could actually try and discuss in an open forum amongst friends and colleagues, as it were, where we would be going ahead in the future. So we had all these sorts of people there, processors, growers, agronomists. You can read it all for yourself. But importantly, regulators, health and safety executive were included as well. And the objectives, as I saw them, were really to look beyond the current issues. So we spend a lot of time with CIPC stewardship, which I see the poster up there, etc., worrying about what's going to go now. You're going to be thinking about your applications and your store loading for this coming season, the immediate sort of stuff, really. But what we would like to do here is actually sort of look beyond a bit. So this really is Storage 2020. What is storage and sprout suppression in particular going to look like in 2020? So try and lift ourselves away from the immediate issues. And the big question underlying, I think, all of that really was the sort of the unspoken elephant in the room really is, could the industry survive without CIPC? And I'll just come back to that at the end a little bit, but something for people to think about. In 2020, could we manage without CIPC if we needed to? Well, I said we would start with a look from across the pond, and we had Professor Nora Olson come across to give her view from the States. Lovely lady with a fantastic wealth of experience from Idaho, where they grow a lot of potatoes, and there is a storage research facility at Kimberley. In some ways, a sort of sister organisation to Sutton Bridge, except you can imagine that everything is probably 10 times as big. And she started off with updating us on where we were with CIPC in the States. And the first fact is that the MRL, the maximum residue level in the States, is 30 parts per million. There you go, 3 times as much as we get over here. They've done a survey of samples in 2009, so you would think it was a fairly live issue over there as well, but they are not doing as much surveying by the looks of things. But their mean detection level was 2.5, and ranging from 0.01 to 23 parts per million. So all below 30, big tick in the box, no problem at all. But they are obviously looking around what's happening in the rest of the world. They do have concerns about CIPC levels, and they really are, I think, looking across to us in this case with our CIPC compliant campaigns as the way forward. And she was very keen to applaud the efforts that have been made by the stewardship group. One of the things that she explained to us was that this situation, as you'd expect, is rather different in the States. The green dot represents Idaho, where pretty much, as I understand it, most of the potatoes are grown. And the orange bit is the east coast, where a lot of the people are. And one of the issues that they have is transporting fresh potatoes in particular from one side of the States to the other side of the States without them sprouting by the time they get there. And she explained to us that it could take 18 to 20 days, apparently, for a potato to ride in a train across from one side of the States to the other. That was higher cost, but could be done in 3 days in a truck. But the overall distribution there could be 30 days, or in a semi truck, 14 days before it gets from the pack house to the consumer. And all this time, it could be sprouting. Apart from anything else, it reminds me, I think I'm never going to bother catching a train in the States if it takes that long to get from one side to the other. I'm certainly going to fly if I want to go from one side to the other. And they also export potatoes as well. They have quite an active market in Southeast Asia for potatoes, as there's more chips and fries eaten over that part of the world. And again, a lot of distribution problems and a lot of sprout control needed in that sort of environment. So, this is one of the things they do. Staggered me. I had heard about it before, but until it was explained to me, I didn't really believe it actually happened. But that there is CIPC being applied to washed potatoes before transport. So a post-washing application, something which we don't obviously do in this part of the world, but will control sprouting through that long period of transport. So a rather different situation over there. Steve is in the audience here, so I need to be careful, but we also took an industry perspective, really. So Steve represents the Potato Processors Association as the chair of the technical committee, and explained to the audience, really, how important sprout suppression is. And I think he was probably speaking more to the regulators and the health and safety executives that were in the room at the time to really explain to them how we do need to be able to control sprouting. And one of the things he mentioned was that I think of sprouting as, weight loss and a problem in processing, etc. But one of the things actually is that, small sprouts can get their way through fryers and things and can be returned as such things out of bags as potential spiders. Not the sort of thing you want to be having in your pack of crisps when you come along, but just shows that there are a lot of consequences of sprouting within a system. CIPC stewardship, obviously absolutely essential to the processing industry. Want to look at application in box stores in more, and I think this is really, as we move to an industry where there is less potentially fresh market potatoes being grown and more into the processing market, there are a lot of box stores out there which could be used in processing in the future, and we need to be able to handle those. There's a lot of variety development going on within the industry, individual sort of processing companies working on a lot of their own varieties and things. And one of the things I think we need to do is understand those from a sprouting perspective more, and then reduce and tailor our control really to fit those individual varieties. We actually, it was mentioned earlier on as well, but one of the issues we have as an industry is we sit here sometimes thinking that change is quite quick, but actually you have one chance per year to make a change. That is probably now, so this is quite a good time to be sitting here thinking about storage, but you've got one chance this year to make a significant change to your potato stores, and then you've got a whole year to wait to see what kind of effect it had before you make the next change. And if you're a fairly conservative sort of business, as it were, those changes you make each year aren't particularly big. So it is difficult to get change into our industry. And there are challenges with all the alternatives to CIPC, which I'll come along a little bit later. We also had an update on the regulation position, which confused me a great deal. A lot of flow charts and a lot of decisions and a lot of committees and things along the way. But we all know there's going to be fewer pesticides in the future, and we all know that there's going to be an awful lot of control over those that are there and any new ones coming along. But from a regulation point of view, I think that the current position with CIPC is well publicised. We all know about it. And it is being re-emphasised, really, that any kind of MRL exceedance does have a lot of clout within the industry, and it could simply trigger withdrawal from use. We do have to continue to be aware of this. And I think that one of the things with CIPC is that the MRL, the maximum residue level, is actually very close to the acute reference dose. So in terms of a lot of pesticides, the MRL is set at a very low level, and in some ways, perhaps we wouldn't want it to be sort of known too widely, but we feel that there's an area where, you know, you can exceed the MRL, or if the MRL is exceeded, then there's actually a lot of insurance in that process to know that it's not really going to do a great deal of harm. But with the CIPC, actually the MRL set at 10 is quite close to the acute reference dose that's used. And the acute reference dose actually apparently relates to German babies, which apparently eat more potatoes than other people or other babies within the EU. And there is a danger that small exceedances could trigger ill health within this demographic. So it is a real live issue, and one that the regulators really are keeping on top of. We heard a lot about the research and development that's ongoing, and it's interesting that there is a lot of history and a lot of work going on at Sutton Bridge. Here's some of the characters involved. You've heard from Adrian already, celebrating 50 years of work at Sutton Bridge, and you can see that they invested an enormous quantity of levy payer money in producing a cake to celebrate the occasion. But there's a lot of knowledge and expertise within these people that has been of great benefit to the industry. There's been a very long process of work on knowing more and understanding about CIPC. And this list starts in 1992 with optimising the use of CIPC for sprout control, and goes through a lot of other projects which have an enormous amount of work to get us to the stage where we can understand how these things move around stores and how we can reduce their impact. And it has been a long burn process. It's a complicated process to understand, and a lot of work has gone on there. It's quite ironic in some ways. As you get right down towards the bottom of the list there, you end up with CIPC decontamination as well. So perhaps you haven't got everything right all the way along. But, an awful lot of information coming out of those projects. An awful lot has been achieved through that, and I don't really want to go sort of onto the sort of individual items one by one and sort of tick them off. But I think the amount of knowledge that has been developed through that program is immense, and is now really coming to the stage where we can start to use it more effectively to help us with the CIPC stewardship, and also to know and understand more about the new sprout suppressants that are coming along as well. We've had a little bit from Adrian already on how we can modify stores to enable better airflow through them, and that also enables us to have better CIPC distribution. And this is only possible through understanding the modelling and the particle size distribution, etc., that happens within CIPC stores. And there have been really very large benefits from this, applying this knowledge and understanding to practical situations. So in an unmodified store, a simple overhead flow store with CIPC applied, you could get a 12 times difference between the highest and the lowest residues of CIPC within that store. So that effectively means that if you're managing to control sprouting within that store, some parts of it have got low levels of CIPC, and others have 12 times as much, or 12 times more than necessary to keep the sprouting under control. And if you then find some sprouting and want to apply a second dose, you're probably going to increase that even further, that differential. Whereas with a modified store, applying all the information that we know, we can reduce that down to just a 4 times differential between the stores. And we need to get this We need to do this, and we need to actually improve that even further if we're going to use CIPC at the lowest levels possible. As well as CIPC and controlled sprouting, there's been an awful lot of work on other sprout suppressants as well, and some of that is on ethylene, for example, but others are coming through the system just now. And it has been, I think, immensely important that we have done this kind of work so that we are in a position where we can either use less CIPC in combination with other treatments, or indeed we are in a position where we are protecting the industry from a potential withdrawal of CIPC. Ethylene certainly isn't the answer to all those sorts of things, but there are other products coming along the stream as well. If we look at stewardship, what has been achieved? Well, actually, an immense amount. Did you know that in pre-stewardship, in 2002 and 2006, this is the pesticide usage survey this comes from, 60.65 tonnes of active ingredient were used to control sprouting. And that there was an average dose rate of 31.6 grams a tonne. Or another way of looking at it is that each tonne of CIPC applied was treated 31,700 tonnes of potatoes. That was the situation before we entered this process. As you look at the post-stewardship surveys in the pesticide use survey, the amount of CIPC used has reduced to 29.55 tonnes, 18 grams a tonne now used, so each tonne of CIPC now treats 55,000 tonnes of potatoes. Big steps forward, but actually we need to continue this process, and it's only through the R&D and the knowledge and understanding that we're going to be able to manage to do that. So this forum was to look at the future really, as well as where we were, so where we've come from and where we're going to. So looking ahead to the future, there are actually a number of products that are available now for controlling sprouting, and I'm sure plenty of people in this room have been using them. So ethylene, spearmint, as well as CIPC, but there are more coming along as well. So we've got DMN, which is likely to be, which is the product from Dawnfresh, and we also have a product from Certis, which is likely to be marketed in the US as Smart Block as well. So we're going to get more and more products coming online, and what we're going to have to do is try and use them. Just a quick summary of DMN. Is likely to be available, I understand. AJ's in the audience, I think. Yes? Yeah, he's waving from the back. So if you want to know more about this, then he's the man to talk to. But it's a new product that is likely to be approved for use this coming season in smaller quantities. It's been used effectively in the States for quite a long time. 15 years. It's also in Canada, New Zealand and Mexico, so not entirely new as such, but new to the UK. It prolongs dormancy. It's reversible, so rather different than using other CIPC. It could be combined with CIPC, or it might be used as a standalone product. Importantly, commercially applied as a fog vapour, so some of the things we've learnt with CIPC we should be able to use with this as well. You're going to need repeat applications for long-term storage, and it's going to need to be applied before dormancy break. The CTG board in the Netherlands has voted to approve its use. I don't quite understand that. AJ gave that to me. I think basically it's moving gently through the system and is likely to be available fairly soon in the UK or the EU. We also have Smart Block as well, which is likely to be available a little bit later, I think, but Alan is in the audience, and if you've got any questions on this, he's certainly the person to speak to. But it's also registered in the US and Canada. It could be combined with CIPC as well, or possibly used as a standalone treatment. It's slightly different in that it's a knockback treatment and can burn back existing sprouts. It's apparently exempt from an MRL in the US. I'm not quite sure how that plays through into the EU, but it is a natural product that is used as a food additive already, so that should help us along these sort of lines. It's going to need repeat applications, and again is a thermal fogged as well. So again, we should be able to use the same sort of equipment and a lot of the things we've learnt already. But with these products, I'm afraid to sort of, without wanting to sort of disappoint the commercial people in the audience who have these products, I'm afraid they are going to be more expensive. That is a fact. They are probably in many ways less effective, although you can argue that with the people in the audience as well if you want, and you're going to need repeat applications. And I just wonder, actually, some of you might sit back and think some of these things and think, actually, I should actually be working very hard to modify my stores to make sure that I use CIPC in the most effective way possible so that I can use low doses safely and perhaps continue to use that rather than just jump in on these new products. But they are going to be an important part of our new armoury going into the future. We looked at some workshops as well, and these came out with some interesting findings and information for us to really take back to the industry, to the Research and Knowledge Transfer Committee of AHDB as to the sort of work we might want to do in the future. We talked a little bit about regulation and politics, and that's a potato's opinion of how we might approach regulation and politics. But there was a few things came out of that. One of them was, could we actually be controlling the supply of CIPC better? So could we basically try and restrict its supply only to very much licensed operators and things? There's quite a lot of that going on at the moment, but there are perhaps some things that could be tightened up. But this does have political or regulatory ramifications. There was considerable concern about the amount of data and the quality of the data required in trials for label changes to these to products. Now, I'm not going to stand here and say that we should have duff data and not very much of it before we change labels, but there is a big issue here in that the quality of data required by the regulators has to follow certain standards, and that's actually extremely difficult to achieve in commercial store environments. Whenever you're doing these trials, it does require a commercial store to put their reputation on the line, as it were, and their crop on the line to conduct these trials. And there's a big expense and amount of effort that goes into this. And it does come. A part of this as well is that we are so lucky, really, to have the Sutton Bridge facility there to be able to provide data from a more controlled environment. The residue concerns continue. I mean, you just can't get away from this, although some of the retailers are perhaps being a little bit more realistic in their expectations of residues these days, which is interesting. And we do have to be very careful about unintended consequences of some label changes. Particularly noted was that if you tell cold store potatoes, fresh market potatoes, that they have to apply only a single dose very early in the season, a natural reaction is to apply as much as you can at that time. And we need to understand that more and make sure that we don't drive those sort of concerns forward. What's needed now? We need better information on the use in box stores of CIPC and other products. We need to understand how we're going to use these partner products in the future. Which ones are those that we should add together, and which ones are best kept apart? Is it best to put them in sequence? Is it best to apply them at the same time? These are the sort of questions we need to have answered, and there's a role here for AHDB, and there's a role for the commercial companies as well. Glyn's made us, woken us up on our storage temperatures, and we need to look hard at those as well. I think there is a conservatism really that develops here where we try and there's a tendency possibly on fresh market to keep things too cold, and possibly in the processing to keep things warmer. And we should be smarter than being able to do things like that. We need to continue to reduce CIPC, and we need to be planning ahead a lot more, and we need to be providing information so as people can do that. There are quite a number of knowledge barriers to getting this information across, not to you guys because you're here listening and hearing about it, but there are other parts of the industry that we're perhaps less well engaged with. One shot per season, cheap CIPC doesn't help us in terms of driving change. Convincing growers to make capital outlays. It's not an easy time in the potato industry to be going around telling people they need to modify their stores. But it does need to be done if we're going to use these things properly. We're going to need, looking ahead really, to sort of things that are going to get fed into the research community for Sutton Bridge and others to take on board is we need to understand, again, more about box stores, precisely how much product is used in different situations. I think we can be, again, we talk about reducing the doses of CIPC, but we actually need to understand exactly how much it is we want in certain situations, and the modelling work, etc., should be able to help us with this. And basically we end up managing the whole store environment within these, so controlling all the sorts of factors that we need to, CO2, temperature, the precise amount of sprout suppressant. We sort of had a session really which comes a lot of wouldn't it nice wouldn't it be nice if we could have that post-washing product? So if there's anybody out there in chemical companies that are able to think about this, I think there is a demand for that if we can get there, but it ain't going to be CIPC in this country. But we do need to understand more about the shelf life of different products. There's a big gain to be had from controlling or improving shelf life on stores, on supermarket shelves. And if we can use some of these products to help us with that, all well and good. And really, I think, we've gone through a lot of this work, but we do need to understand more about the science of dormancy break. If we're going to apply a range of different products in a range of different situations, we really do need to understand how and when and why dormancy breaks. So, could the industry survive without CIPC? That's, well, you can think about that yourself. My view would be, if we're looking to 2020, which was a sort of the vision of this product, I don't think we could. We're not in a situation at that level where we would be able to manage with these new products. We just don't understand them enough to be able to control sprouting. There'll be a lot of increased costs, and we need to understand how to partner them a little bit better. And the important part of it is you could point at different parts of the industry and say, well, they could manage without CIPC if they really tried hard enough. But I think we need to understand, and we all know this really, we are a completely integrated industry. What goes on in one part and one of those bubbles affects what happens in the other bubbles as well. So it's in all of our interests to make sure that we carry on doing it. So, as a summary, we need it for now and in the future, but we need to be able to use it, CIPC, more effectively. It's going to get more complicated, and it's going to get more expensive, and you're going to have to get used to that. I think that the levy-funded R&D that goes on at Sutton Bridge and other places is absolutely essential to ensure that we continue to have this armoury and this information to take us forward. Commercial companies with new products, etc., have an enormous role to play in the development of products and trying to help growers understand how they can be used. And I'm afraid you have to understand that CIPC, in my view, has simply been too cheap for too long, and you're just going to have to wake up and get used to it. Thank you very much.